Vince Houston, who was 38 years old at the time of writing this story, considers himself a tough trial lawyer. His opinion is probably based on the influence he exerts on the opposing lawyer and his success in court proceedings. He's good-looking, rich, and smart. However, his life is far from ideal. His wife Angela is a cold fish. Angela, 37, wasn't always a cold fish during the action of this saga, but now she is. Angela used to like to have fun. She had a high libido and zeal during love, which could not be compared. She and Vince, even after they got married, loved making love in unfamiliar places, the stranger the better. This included among the more bizarre places, including joining the Mile High Club on Vince's desk when he was a junior lawyer and could have lost his job if he had been caught. In the bed of her strict parents, when they were gone for only 20 or 30 minutes. Under the stands at a football match they went to with friends whose son was playing. Under a picnic bench in a state park. On a tour of a medieval castle, and perhaps, in the most inexplicable place of all, in the toilet of the Department of Motor Vehicles. Angela became cold as a fish about 3 years after the birth of their third child, and after what seemed like a minor traffic accident, but which may have damaged her libido. While Vince suffers from the fact that he cannot passionately love, he does not consider divorce a realistic option for many reasons. First of all, he still loves Angela very much, and she is his best friend. Secondly, he loves his children, and it would kill him to be a part-time father. Thirdly, Angela's father is the managing partner of the law firm of which he is a partner. Fourth, although Angela is no longer infatuated with him, she still treats him well and is devoted to him. She is embarrassed by her inability to enjoy making love to him. Fifth, otherwise he really likes his life, and he doesn't want to ruin it. What Vince lacks in the passion of his life, he makes up for with passion. His opponents call it depravity when doing his job. Because of his take-no-prisoners approach, clients love him, judges just tolerate him, jurors either love him or hate him, but he gets through to them anyway, and opposing lawyers hate him. Many opposing lawyers try to settle the case quickly when Vince is on the other side instead of dealing with him. In a way, Judy Blackstone, who was 42 at the beginning of this story, is the female equivalent of Vince Houston. She is a trial attorney at the largest firm in the city where Vince lives and practices, although she lives on the opposite side of town from Vince. Despite the fact that Judy does not have the enormous attractiveness given by God due to proper hygiene, intense physical exercises that have successfully shaped her body, some constructive medical procedures, fashion sense, and personal hygiene, all men look at her with apprehension. Her nickname is the Black Widow, not because she has ever eaten one of her husbands, she has a third marriage, no children, or because of the color of her skin, but because she is poisonous to anyone who opposes her, not only in the courtroom, but even in her law firm and in personal relationships. She is even richer than Vince and inspires fear in the lawyers of the opposite side no less than he does. Vince and Judy do not usually practice in the same areas of law and only know each other a little from their work at the bar. They know each other's reputation. On a clear May morning, Vince's father-in-law Harold Morrison brought the executives of a new affinity client to Vince's office shortly after his arrival. "Vince, I would like to introduce you to Charles, CEO of Affinity, Carolyn, staff counsel, and Jackson, engineering manager." After shaking hands and exchanging pleasantries, Charles told them why they were here. "Last week, we were sued for all sorts of outrageous things, including product quality liability, fraud, violation of state laws on unfair competition, and others. When we went to our usual outside lawyer with this, they refused to represent us in this case. Although they didn't say it directly, Carolyn is convinced that it's because Judy Blackstone is on the other side." Vince's eyebrows went up. "Yes," Carolyn continued, "the senior partner of our usual outside firm, Winston and McGrath, had his head blown off in a lawsuit against Blackstone last year, and it left him with a very unpleasant taste in his mouth. He recommended you as someone who could match your skill." Vince was glad of the compliment and eager to argue with the infamous Black Widow. After half an hour of discussion, he agreed to take up the case. As expected, the trial was extremely controversial. Vince filed a counterclaim that matched the intensity of the complaint, added several federal grounds for action, and filed a motion to transfer the case to federal court, where, in his opinion, he had an advantage over the Black Widow. Sarcastic suggestions poured in. The oral arguments were hostile, and both sides acted in a take no prisoners mode. Just when it seemed like it couldn't get any worse, an event happened that angered Vince. Vince sent one of his employees to testify by a third party, a seemingly harmless witness. Shockingly, the Black Widow was present at the deposition herself and completely intimidated Vince's colleague to the point where tears came to her eyes when she told him about the situation. "I'm going to get that bitch," he fumed. A few weeks later, when Black Widow replaced the testimony of an important third-party witness in upstate New York and rejected Vince's request to reschedule it for a more appropriate time, he decided this was his chance to put her in her place. So he arranged to go to the deposition rather than send a partner or, God forbid, another employee. Vince didn't like going to upstate New York in the winter, but the bystander refused to come to the big city and insisted that the testimony be given in a modest motel conference room next to his house, and not in the ostentatious law offices that Vince and Judy were used to. While Judy was questioning the witness, Vince raised numerous objections. During Vince's cross-examination, she had her own lengthy objections. The testimony took much longer than it should have, but in the late afternoon it finally ended. While Judy and Vince were collecting all the physical evidence, actually interacting to make sure everyone had a copy of everyone and otherwise collecting their papers, the witness and the court reporter quickly left. When they finally packed up and were ready to leave the witness stand, Judy looked at her watch. "Because of your tedious and juvenile cross-examination, we missed every opportunity to take the last flight tonight," she growled. "If you had postponed it as I asked, we could have arrived at a more convenient time when there were more flights, but you couldn't even do a simple courtesy," Vince growled back. "Plus," he continued, pulling back the blinds on the window in the conference room, "I hate to break the news to you, but it looks like 6 or 7 inches of snow has fallen on the ground, and it's still coming." Vince fiddled with his cell phone for a minute or two. Judy looked at him, and then he continued, "According to the weather forecast on my iPhone, snow is still falling at a rate of about 5 centimeters per hour. We'll be lucky if we can get to the city and get a decent hotel room." When Judy opened the blinds and looked out the window, she moaned. Then, in an uncharacteristic moment of sanity, she said, "We'll be lucky if we catch a taxi that will take us to the city. Let's take one together, rather than looking for two separately. Is the Black Widow going to lure me into her web and bite me to win a lawsuit?" Vince chuckled. "Funny asshole," Judy retorted, not with a sneer, but with a smile. With their bulging briefcases, they went down to the lobby of a very modest motel, located 6 floors below the one where they usually stayed when they left town. "Can you call a taxi to take us to the city?" Vince asked the young male receptionist with the name Jimmy on his badge. "I'm sorry, sir," he replied. "I contacted the only 2 taxi companies in town for help from another guy when only 7 centimeters of snow fell on the ground, and they both told me that they had suspended work until tomorrow afternoon." "What?" Judy exclaimed. "Maybe we can hire an Uber." "I'm sorry, ma'am," Jimmy continued. "We don't have Uber or Lyft services in this area, and besides, I heard on the radio that they are suspended in the city too." "How do you get home?" Vince asked. "I just started my shift before I called the taxi companies, and I work for another 10 hours. I may have to extend it if no one else can come to work tomorrow morning," the clerk replied. "Okay, how about here? Do you have any rooms available?" Vince asked. "I don't think so, but let me check it out," Jimmy replied and then started clicking on the keyboard. "I'm sorry, the only room we have, and I'm only mentioning it because you two seem desperate, is the one that the night manager sometimes uses when he's on duty, even though he canceled work for today when the restaurant closed." "What? Is the restaurant closed?" Judy screamed. "I'm sorry, ma'am," the timid receptionist replied. I can provide you with a room if you want, but the bed is only a double, and the bathroom is not too big, although it has a full-size shower cabin." Vince and Judy moaned and cursed for the next 15 minutes to no avail. After they looked around the room, Vince said quickly, "I'll get a room. Here's $200 in cash," handing the clerk $200. "Bullshit," Judy squealed. "I'm a woman. You can stay in the lobby while I get a room." "What the hell?" Vince chuckled. "You act like you have the biggest balls in the state, and then you want to be treated like a damsel in distress? Damn it, this is not going to happen." "I've already paid Jimmy," Vince retorted, glancing at the young man's name tag for the first time. "The room rate plus tips, so I'm entitled to it." The argument continued in the lobby. Jimmy blushed more and more as the swearing grew louder and harsher. When they reached the lobby, Jimmy quickly took 2 keys from a drawer behind the reception desk, real metal keys, not the key cards used for other rooms, and handed one each to Vince and Judy. "You two figure it out," he said. "I'm not going to get involved in this." A malicious smile appeared on Vince's face, and then he ran back to where the room was. He heard the sound of hooray, and then a combination of slap and thud. He looked around. Judy slipped on a wet patch, obviously from the melted snow, and was lying on her back. He would have laughed if it hadn't been for the fact that her legs were spread apart. It seemed that she was not wearing panties, and her hips looked really beautiful. He felt a twitch in his crotch, and then he went over to Judy and helped her up. The nervous receptionist helped. "Are you okay?" Vince asked. "Except for the loss of dignity, I'm fine," she replied after a short pause. A smile flashed across Judy's face, and then she quickly replied in a dismissive manner, "Thanks for saying that, even if it's not true." After a few more apologies from Jimmy and Judy, who were smoothing her clothes, Vince said, "Judy, let's talk." After they were far enough away from the clerk that they couldn't be heard, Vince said, "Look, it's been a really long day on the way here, heavy disputed readings, and now this weather mess, and these unusually bad circumstances. Even though we don't like each other, let's be adults. Why don't we spend the night in the same room? We don't have any suitcases with us, so we'll have to sleep in our clothes anyway. I'm pretty damn sure I couldn't sleep for 10 minutes in this shitty little lobby, and you probably can't either." Judy stared into his eyes. "Okay, I guess we don't have a real choice. Let's put away our briefcases and bribe the desk clerk to let us into the restaurant's small kitchen to see if we can get something to eat." It took a $500 bribe and a promise not to tell anyone before the clerk let them into the kitchen and got them a bottle of scotch and several glasses from the bar, as well as a pair of toothbrushes and a small tube of toothpaste from behind the reception desk. Vince made them an omelet with cheese. Judy surpassed her usual culinary skills by making toast that didn't burn and found some butter and jam. They teased each other while cooking, and then ate it standing at the main counter in the kitchen so that they would not be seen by other guests who might pass by the restaurant. After they separated to call their spouses and Vince their children, half an hour later they conducted a reconnaissance in the lobby. There was a young, beautiful couple with 2 small children and 2 attractive young women who seemed to be together. Although the receptionist wouldn't let anyone else into the kitchen, when Vince secretly asked, he still bought a bottle of rum and some snacks at the bar for another $100. After that, as well as a few nuts and chocolate bars from the vending machine, after the couple sent their children to bed, the 6 adults threw a party. It turned out that all the party participants were interesting people with good life stories, loved to have fun, and, fueled by booze, the 6 had a great time. The 2 young women were a stripper and an expensive call girl, and neither of them was shy about talking about it after the first 2 drinks. They used to stay in hotels above the class of the one they were in, but were caught up in the storm. A pretty young couple with children belonged to the middle class with a plebeian job, but, as they also said after 3 drinks each, they were swingers. This was the kind of motel they usually stayed at, given their limited financial options. After a few drinks and flirting with attractive young women and a young mother, Vince allowed the long-dormant naughty part of his personality to manifest itself. Within earshot of Judy, he called her, "my longtime lover." We wanted to spend a pleasant weekend away from our spouses at the resort, but we also got caught in this storm. Much to Vince's shock, since he thought Judy had no sense of humor and was just trying to pull her chain she played along with him. Judy and Vince politely declined both offers. Judy said that, "We haven't had enough time together lately and we need each other." But it was obvious that talking about love and their instructive conversations with people they would normally never talk to inspired both Vince and Judy. It was 1 o'clock in the morning when they ran out of drinks and went to their rooms. Judy and Vince, both of whom usually hadn't drunk much or gotten drunk since college, were in high spirits as they stumbled back to their room. Vince could barely open the door with his key. Both were well drunk and felt erotic after chatting with 4 young men. When they entered their room, Judy began to undress and muttered, "I really need a shower." For some reason, Vince felt very proud that he had brought his opponent to 2 amazing moments. As his emotions began to subside, he realized that they would be cold if they slept on top of the sheets, so he got up, pulled the top sheet and blanket from under Judy's limp body, climbed in next to her, and covered them both with the top sheet and blanket. Both quickly passed out with pleasant fatigue. Vince went to the bathroom, did his chores, washed his face and armpits, brushed his teeth with the brush Jimmy had given him, and then returned to the bed, where Judy was just getting up. She got up, squeezed past him, did the same thing in the bathroom as he did, in addition to wiping as much cum off her thighs as possible, and then returned to bed. The morning light was now streaming through the only large window in the room, which was only covered with transparent curtains, and Vince got a good look at Judy's body, something he had talked to a lot last night, but had never been able to fully see. When Judy seemed to be trying to find her clothes scattered on the floor, Vince stood up and held her at arm's length. "Tin," he exclaimed. "You have the body of a 25-year-old girl." "Yes, of course," Judy waved away the comment. "Holy shit, you're really doing it," Vince said reverently. A devilish grin flashed across Judy's face, and then she objected. "I liked the dreamy man in the middle of the night better," and then pushed him away and began to gather up her scattered clothes. They dressed in silence, taking their time, as their clothes were scattered everywhere, and stole glances at each other's bodies. And by about 8:30, they were as collected as possible, given the circumstances. "Let's see if they've opened the kitchen." "I'm starving," Judy said. The girl chuckled. "It looks like you two really reconnected last night. You two have the most obvious look of freshly used that I've ever seen in my life." Judy groaned. But Vince returned to his role from last night. "Yes, last night she gave me the best physical moment of my life after you two turned us on, and then we had love in the middle of the night. I couldn't be happier." After a pleasant 20-minute conversation, during which all four of them finished breakfast and actually talked about other things besides love, Judy and Vince got up to leave. They saw young parents with children who had been in the cafe the night before, looked at the menu board, and then turned to leave. Vince greeted the parents cheerfully and shook hands with the children, who were probably 3 or 4 years old. "Won't you stay for breakfast?" Vince asked. "We're a little short on cash, and as you know, breakfast is not included in the price," my father replied. "We had such a great time last night. Let Judy and me buy you a drink." Vince smiled, pulled another $100 out of his money clip, which seemed to have an endless supply of it, and handed it over. "We can't." The startled wife began to speak when Judy came up to her, squeezed her hand with a $100 bill and said, "We'd be so happy if you did." And then Judy and Vince left to the sound of a sincere "thank you." As they walked to the front desk, where Jimmy was still sitting, Judy muttered to herself, "You surprise me. You're not a complete jerk." Vince just grinned back. Behind the counter, they were warmly greeted by Jimmy, who tried to suppress a knowing smile, apparently realizing, just like the stripper and the call girl, that they were making love. Since Vince tipped Jimmy more last night than he earned in a week, he couldn't wait to please. "I knew that you would want to hit the road this morning, so I contacted taxi companies and airlines. They expect the roads to be cleared in the next couple of hours, so a taxi should be here for you by 11 a.m. Flights are scheduled to resume early in the morning, so if you tell me which city you want to go to, I can rebook your tickets." Vince took his ticket from yesterday's jacket pocket and handed it to Jimmy, and Judy took hers out of her purse. Since they were flying first class, Jimmy was able to rebook their flight at 2:15 a.m., receiving another thank you note from Vince, which he was glad to receive. When they returned to their room, Vince looked at his Rolex and then said lasciviously, "It's only about 9:15. What are we going to do for another hour and 45 minutes until the taxi arrives?" And grabbed Judy by the hips. "You fool," she growled, pushing his hands away. Then, looking into his eyes, she sighed and said, "Okay, but this time I'm using you, and first we need to wash away the sin of last night." They casually undressed, went into the bathroom, and actually leisurely washed each other in the shower, and Vince only got half a dozen slaps on his hands while he was washing her. Since they had slept less than they needed to last night, they snuggled back under the blankets. "We can't sleep," Judy muttered. "We're going to miss the taxi." "I set the alarm on my watch," Vince retorted. "Do you know that I hate you?" Judy sighed. "I've never cheated on any of my 3 husbands, and I'm mad at you and at myself. I've never cheated before either, and I blame you for that. So just get over it," Vince replied quietly. A few seconds later, Judy was snoring on his shoulder, and soon after, he fell asleep too. After calling their offices from the airport, when Judy and Vince were sitting in the waiting room waiting to be called to first class, Vince sat next to Judy and asked, "How the hell am I going to explain the scratches on my wife's back? And how do I explain that I walk bow-legged to my husband? You should register this thing between your legs as a weapon. I think I'll tell my hubby that I was riding. And you tell your wife that you were attacked by a mountain lion," Judy giggled. "You mean a mountain lion, not a mountain lion," Vince grinned. "It's the same thing, asshole," Judy replied and elbowed him in the ribs. After Judy and Vince returned home, all the lawyers involved in the trial became a little more cordial towards each other, although to most observers it might seem that they were still at each other's throats. It was obvious that the case was moving towards a trial. The stakes seemed to be getting higher every week, not only in monetary terms, but also in terms of the viability of the parties' business practices. About 4 months after Judy and Vince returned from the motel, they began jury selection on Tuesday morning. The jury of 3 women, 3 men, and 2 female deputies was selected in the late afternoon, when Vince and Judy made opening statements. Both Judy and Vince amazed the courtroom over the next 4 days with their interrogation or cross-examination of witnesses, arguments to Judge Samantha Beaufort, and courtroom theater performances. At about 4 o'clock on Friday afternoon, the judge announced an early break. The court will resume its session on Monday at 1 o'clock in the afternoon. The jury is dismissed for the weekend. Representatives of the parties, please stay in your seats. Mr. Houston and Ms. Blackstone will come with me to the boardroom. Judy and Vince approached Judge Beaufort in his office and were motioned to sit down. After the judge took a deep breath, she met the eyes of both of them. "As a couple, you two are probably the best lawyers who have ever come before me. It makes me wonder how you could be so stupid. Obviously, this case is worth hundreds of millions of dollars, and the injunctions you are asking for could harm your client's business. And yet you seem willing to let 6 jurors decide your fate. Why?" Judy and Vince were slightly puzzled, but they didn't show it. "Our clients don't seem to want to discuss the settlement seriously," Judy replied. "Well, I think it's time for both of you to kick them in the ass. As you know, each of you has a petition in limine, petitions about what evidence can be presented or excluded, and all of them are still under my consideration. I'm going to make a decision on them on Monday afternoon. Both will be in favor of one side, and will make it very difficult for the other to win. I am not telling you on behalf of which party I will make the decision, but I suggest that you meet with your clients, explain the seriousness of the situation, and ask them to settle the matter. If the signed settlement agreement and the proposed court order are not submitted to me by 12:45 on Monday, I will make a decision on the petitions and we will return the jury. Is that clear?" "We understand," Vince and Judy replied in unison. "Transfer your courtroom skills to dispute resolution skills." "Dismissed," Judge Beaufort barked. Vince and Judy were a little shocked when they returned to the courtroom. Vince turned to Judy and said, "Let's meet with our clients separately, and then have dinner in the main conference room of my office at 1900 hours. I'll arrange everything." "Good idea," Judy replied, heading for her client's location. That night and throughout Saturday afternoon, the negotiations were heated and tense. Judy and Vince saved money on preparing for the trial by leaving it to their assistants, as they were completely immersed in negotiations. The trial and negotiations were so intense that they both stayed overnight at a hotel instead of making the roughly hour-long commute from work to their homes. By about lunchtime on Saturday, all but one of the problems had been resolved. None of the clients agreed to this. It was a marketing ploy that Vince's client used for one of his most successful products. Judy and Vince were tired and really wanted to negotiate. Suddenly, Vince looked up and a big smile appeared on his face. He turned to Judy and said, "Mississippi Blackstone, could you please meet me outside the room for a few minutes? Maybe I have an idea." While the other lawyers and clients stayed in the conference room, Judy and Vince talked quietly in the alcove. "I think I have a solution," Vince smiled. "I have to discuss this with my client and do about 10 minutes of research, but I think it will work. If this works out and we settle the matter tonight, will you spend the night with me in my hotel room?" Judy stared at him. "You're kidding, right?" "Hell, no," Vince said. "I need to get something out of this, because I'm going to give up hundreds of thousands of dollars in fees if the trial doesn't continue, and I think the judge will rule in my favor on the motions." "That's bullshit. She won't do that," Judy growled and then continued. So you think I'm a fool to make such an offer? Admit it, Judy. We're both fools. Maybe not in this particular case, but in many others. How many times have you represented someone you didn't think was right and perverted justice for the sake of money? You know what we both have, and that makes us fools. When we usually act as fools, someone loses big. In this situation, it's a win for both of us. We both give hundreds of thousands of dollars for a night of animal love. It makes us both fools, not just you, Vince supported. Judy stared at him for a full minute. Then she stated, I'm not interested in having an affair with you or anyone else. Me too, Vince replied. Although we probably don't hate each other anymore. I know I don't hate you, but we're still rivals. We have no chance of continuing the novel. You have to at least like someone to have a lasting romance. Judy stared at him for 2 more minutes without blinking or answering. Okay, asshole. Contrary to my common sense, but since I really believe that the settlement is in the best interests of my client, I agree. They shook hands, returned to the conference room, told both sides that they and their lawyers were going to have dinner separately and would meet in 2 hours, and left. Over dinner, Vince presented his idea to his clients. It was a way to refine their marketing methods, which should have been equally effective, while eliminating the problem the other side had with their current marketing technique. Both the CEO and the executive director of his client liked the idea. They immediately called the head of the marketing department and picked her up from the party. She liked the idea, but she wanted her 2 main assistants to run it. 40 minutes later, when they were finishing dessert, she called the CEO back and said that her assistants agreed with her the change would be even more effective than the current campaign, which the other side objected to. Everyone at Vince's table was smiling. When we meet with them in my office, I will tell them about the changes and explain that you do not like it, but you are ready to agree, just to settle the matter. We don't want to look worried. That should be enough. The CEO and Chief Operating Officer grinned at the same time. When the parties met at 8 p.m., Vince, reluctantly, presented his proposal to Judy and her client. They went out into the hall and conferred for about 15 minutes, and then returned with the words, yes. Everyone shook hands, but Vince's smile was the most sincere. Judy said that her secretaries would come to her office at 10 a.m. on Sunday and that the documents would be ready for viewing by 2 p.m., so then everyone should gather in her office. During the handshakes, Vince secretly handed Judy a key card to his room with a note attached to it that read 1701. Judy arrived at 1701 shortly after 9:30 a.m. She was wearing designer jeans, high heels, and a low-cut blouse. You look great, Vince said. Yes, I know, Judy giggled. Is there anything to drink? I'm going to need it to get through this night of torture. Well, this is the wrong attitude, Vince smiled, handing her a whiskey and water. You should strive to be the best at everything you do, he continued with an even wider smile. If you're going to be a fool, you have to make love better than anyone in the world. He grinned even wider and began to unbutton her blouse, although she still hadn't finished her scotch. Vince had prepared well for the night, armed with a vibrator and several small blue pills. He knew that he might never have passionate sexual intercourse again, at least not until all of his children went to college, and he reconsidered his relationship with Angela, and by then he might not like it so much. Plus, even though he didn't hate Judy, he still had a confrontational relationship with her, and for some reason he thought it would be some kind of punishment for her if she left more satisfied than at any other point in her life. When Judy left around 9:30 the next morning to meet with the text editors at her office, Vince hugged her. Looking into her soul with his own eyes, he said, You are the best physical person in the world. If you took the money, you could easily earn $2,000 an hour, even more than you earn as a trial lawyer. Judy silently chastised herself for beaming like an idiot, remembering the previous night as she rode down in the elevator. Judge Beaufort was presented with a signed settlement agreement and a proposed draft judgment by Monday afternoon, and he closed the case. Judy and Vince's clients were satisfied with the result. When Judy personally delivered the papers to Judge Beaufort's office, she asked for a meeting with the judge. What can I do for you, Miss Blackstone? Judge Beaufort asked. I was just wondering, Your Honor, how you were going to rule on the petitions. I was going to grant both your petition and Mr. Houston's, he smiled. But you said you were going to rule on both cases in favor of one side, not divide equally, Judy replied, surprised. I lied. Beaufort grinned and then said, "Good afternoon, Miss Blackstone." When Judy, bow-legged, walked back to the elevator, she was a little annoyed, but then realized that a settlement agreement was probably better for all concerned. Over the next 18 months, Blackstone and Houston saw little of each other. Maybe once or twice at a restaurant or other place in the city, or at an event at a bar. They were cordial, but not friendly. We never exchanged glances or maintained long-term contact. About 18 months later, one of Vince's partners walked into his office on a Tuesday morning. "Vince, the client wants us to consider a new case with you as the lead lawyer. I've reviewed the complaint, and I'm not sure we should accept it. I have prepared a brief memo on the legal and factual aspects of this case as we know them." "Let me take a look," Vince replied, holding out his hand. After reading the memo first, and then the complaint, he realized that he was already against it and that it would take a lot of work, and at first glance it seemed that this was the intended result of only 50-50. Then he got to the line with the lawyer's signature in the complaint. It read, "Judith Virginia Blackstone," in bold. He smiled to himself and said, "Let's get on with it." 2 days later, a notice of attendance appeared in Judy's mailbox. When she read the caption, "Vincent Allen Houston," her crotch twitched, and this twitch was followed by an inner grin. End.